So this is arguably one of the most important sessions, because this is where we're going to try, I'm going to come over here again, it's arguably one of the most important sessions, where we're going to try and pull together what you were talking about in the workshops and what we heard about in the workshops. To hear the summary from the two, you will hear the summary from the 2 sessions you've attended today, and also the summary from the 9 sessions that you didn't attend, so you can at least hear very briefly what was said in all the other sessions. So if I could ask the facilitators for the first 6 SDGs, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, to come up, please. And you've got your last chair. We only need 6 because I'm going to stay standing. And if you could sit in order 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, please, so that everybody knows which one you're representing nice and easily. I'll introduce you when you're on the stage. For all of you in the audience, they are under strict instructions, 5 minutes each. There is going to be a timer counting your 5 minutes, and I'm going to be brutal. So if you could please just use your 5 minutes, that would be fantastic. And I'm looking for Abdelgi. Thank you. And I'm looking for Sheila. Sorry? Abdel. Abdel. Thank you. Thank you. Right, so very quickly to introduce you, and then we're going to kick off. We've got Mansour Ndiaye, the team leader for inclusive growth at the UNDP. Abdel Ismail is the incoming head of the IIRI in Africa. Sheila Tlou is the East Africa regional director for UNAIDS. Charaf Ahmimed is the program specialist for the social and human sciences at UNESCO's South African regional office. Bashir Ndiaye is the senior gender advisor, human rights and political partnerships at UNAIDS. And over here on the end, I'll move out of my way, is Adrian Sims, CEO for the Alliance for Water Stewardship. Now, if I could please implore you, you've each got your 5 minutes on the clock, it's there. And for every minute that you use up, poor old Adrian loses one. Okay? And he's very grumpy, and he can get quite violent. Okay, so Mansour, if you could do 5 minutes, please, on what were you discussing in your group? Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Oh, sorry, we need mics, yes.
Yes, so I think, no, you should have to restart it.
Absolutely not.
Okay, so we had a very productive session with representatives from the Finance Trust Bank, the Oxfam South Africa, and the African Development Bank. What we discussed was roughly how can we ensure that we put in place systems, strategies, and policies to ensure that growth is accelerated, growth is inclusive, and benefits the poor. A number of takeaway messages came out of the discussion. First is that relevant stakeholders have initiated bold programs to achieve the SDGs. I can cite the high five of the African Development Bank, and also national and community level initiatives by relevant stakeholders. But here the challenge is how to ensure policy coherence, how to ensure that we have appropriate coordination mechanisms, and also broad partnership to make this work. And this is really critical if you are to achieve meaningful change. The third message is, in order to do so, one way is to use the national development plans as a platform to not only boost inclusive growth, economic diversification, but also make sure that initiatives are prioritized, because everything cannot be achieved at the same level and with the same extent. Fourth message is the private sector must be engaged more strategically, because what is needed is for them to adopt sustainable and inclusive business models. And that will allow them not only to reap the benefits of the SDGs, but also to ensure that they make profits. So that way, they will still make profits, but then also pay attention to economic progress, social progress and environmental aspects. Then, of course, this will be critical to ensure that the private sector aligns its policies and strategies on the SDGs, which is really what we're looking for. And of course, what we're trying to do is to ensure that the private sector uses a business unusual approach. The fifth message is, even with all of that, we still have a long way to go. Initiatives need to even better target the poor and the most vulnerable. Youth, women, girls, and so on. But with specific markers, like gender markers, to ensure that we can account for the progress made. Sixth message is that we also need to ensure that the most vulnerable benefit from capacity building and access to productive resources. That is key if we are meant to really leave no one behind. And then, of course, also best practices needs to be replicated and put to scale. We do not need to reinvent the wheel, but really to learn from each other and make sure that we put to practice what works. Seventh message is that ITC and green jobs must be leveraged as a driver for inclusive growth. And the last message is for growth to be job creating, because that's really what we want, to create jobs. Entrepreneurship is key and need to be promoted. I'm done. I think I'm still in the 5 minutes.
That's the way to do it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mansour. So I heard entrepreneurship, I heard business is unusual, I heard share experiences, private sector, inclusive business, and partnerships. Thank you. So, representing SDG 2 and Zero Hunger, we have Abdul. Your clock is reset.
Thank you. Actually, representing William Asiko, who was supposed to be here, who's a moderator, but unfortunately has to leave. So I'll try my best, and I hope that Andrew is around also. So we have a very interesting session representing three major views. One of them is the private sector, with Andrew, and the second one is small holding farmers, and this is represented by Jen, who's really working with them here within South Africa. And I presented a case where you can really bring a technology that is mature in somewhere and prove to be quite successful and implemented in Africa rather than starting from scratch. So the main important messages that come through this is the first one really is on smallholder farmers. And the theme actually came out is Andrew, cracking smallholder farmers will accelerate accomplishment of the SDGs. So it seems this area, the place where we should start. Few issues that were discussed, which we need to address for smallholder farmers to really improve food security and nutritional security and agricultural sustainability. One of them is we need better engagement with the smallholder farmers for zero hunger. And Jane actually said the problem is not having sufficient land, but rather use it properly. And I think this is really quite important, which seem the smallholder farms are really lacking technologies that are already available. So, and this is something within our reach. I think we should put more effort into that to make sure that we have ways to deliver these technologies to them. Access to chemical fertilizers come very strongly, and this is very common in Africa, even for commercial production. Fertilizers and chemicals in general are quite expensive compared to the outside world, basically because the infrastructure for transportation is lacking and quite expensive. Access to market also come very strong. I think this is also for commercial and medium farming, because without sufficient market structure in place, it becomes very difficult for producers to produce. And I quote my own experience with many farmers. Wherever we go and talk to them, we can improve your productivity by changing a variety or a technology. The immediate question is, where is the market? Where can I sell it? And it seems like that is a complete disconnect between what the farmers are doing and what the market structure that is available for them. And in most cases, they end up losing because of that, because the price at the farm gate is very, very low. So we need to work on that, and government should have a big role into that. Interestingly, one point that made by Jane is there is no need to invent the wheel. Whatever works for commercial farmers will work for smallholder farmers, and this is quite interesting and pleasing at the same time. So it seems there is a lot of technologies that you can use with smallholder farmers. Smallholder farmers are willing to accept and adopt technologies, so they are quite eager to get new technologies. So there is no gap really between them and technologies except the information. So we need to get the information to them as soon as possible. And it seems like the extension systems are really also disconnected from these remote villages. So we need to have some way where we can really deliver this information in time with training for smallholder farmers so they really trigger food production in Africa. Public and private sector partnership need to create a framework around agriculture production by smallholder farmers in a way that they add value to it. They should ensure a secure price for those farmers. This is happening in Asia, actually, and has been one of the major elements for the development in Africa is the securing price for farmers, so the farmers are not worried to really produce whatever they can, and also help in developing market and secure input, as I mentioned before.
1 minute.
The second important point is partnership. This is quite interesting. The question came is how government work with private sector, and also from the other side, how private sector could work with farmers. See, we need somebody in the middle actually to mediate this process and make sure that there is a strong engagement between farmers and private sector. How technologies involving IP issues could really be made public. And we have a very good example working, we ERI have a very good example of working with Syngenta, where we were able to really develop many technologies that have an IP issues to make them public. Use of IT technology, there is a lot of work on that already in Asia, and that also can be brought here. How can we accelerate the process of delivery of the process? So there is also a discussion on for integrating value chain.
Can you conclude?
Okay.
That's your time. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you. Sorry, I said I needed to be brutal, but what I heard was very important to engage smallholder farmers. They need better technology so they can be more efficient. They're ready and willing for it. Sounds like you need some good partnerships to make that happen. Thank you. Sheila, representing SDG 3.
That's right. Thank you very much.
Clock is started.
Okay, but I have to correct something first. I'm the just retired UNAIDS Regional Director for Eastern and Southern Africa. I now chair the Global HIV Prevention Coalition, and Bashir there is the one who's standing for the new Regional Director. So I hope that half-minute will be taken care of. And I want to recognize our scribe there. Ours is SDG 3, and really, this is the one SDG where we're able to see just how interrelated the SDGs are. By the time we finished talking, we had covered like at least 12 of the SDGs, just to show that.
That doesn't give you more time, by the way.
No, it doesn't, but it's great. But for inclusive partnerships between business and government, we found that between business, government, and the civil society, we actually concluded that they're there in health, and they're happening, but we had excellent examples. Now, one of the really critical success factors that we saw in terms of supporting better health outcomes in communities that we identified was being inclusive and actually partnering with communities, especially traditional leaders, because in the ultimate, you're ensuring that whatever is happening is ingrained and it is sustainable. So that was really the great part. And also the fact that community volunteers are there, they are willing, but they have to have incentives rather than expecting them to take on multiple roles without being paid or having any incentives. Examples that we had were that ADCOC, for example, focuses on communities to support the belief that really healthy people make strong communities, and they actually grow into strong nations. So they are involved in initiation school support, ensuring that to avoiding botched male circumcisions, and therefore ensuring the livelihood of our males. Now, hold that for me a little bit. So that 1 minute is not gone. We have also Regency Global, which works with the private sector and governments and really has been instrumental in sexual and reproductive health and rights for schools. They've covered 600 schools and over 200,000 learners to ensure that whatever is learned is actually sustained and they can use those skills in other life opportunities. And then we had the Across for Technology for Development, where they're working with governments and civil society to make data accessible. That data that people collect on the ground is also used to actually empower communities to make changes. An example that was given was where, information on the number of toilets that are available per community led to such a great competition that actually the number of toilets increased. So that's the use of data. Now the challenges, the common challenges that we found were simply that, well, firstly, ensuring that businesses are aware that it is part of their responsibility to take part, to participate in health. Most of the time, businesses are still thinking, the private sector is still thinking, it's a government thing. So you have that. On the other hand, you have where a government sees something that is very effective, but instead of taking it up, they just leave it. And it becomes now a private sector baby without their involvement. So it was really to say we need that thing. The other common challenge was the fact that, the sustainability, ensuring that, the leadership and the drive is sustainable. We gave an example where we have a very great collaboration between the SADC private sector and the ministers of health. But because people change and ministers change, you need to have that constant thing that says, by the way, we agreed on this, can it be sustained? So that was really one of the challenges. Now, we have opportunities. Opportunities are really the use of technology. Young people are on social media, on whatever. They need to be used to ensure that communities are also technologically savvy, because that has been found as one of the hindrances. Even at civil society level, you find that technology is still something that they have to learn the use of technology. And the other opportunities that we really have is to ensuring that we leverage on what is available at community level and working with communities to ensure that whatever health conditions are there, we have indicators for success. Because right now we have health, but we really don't have indicators that are tangible and can be used for that SDG. So okay. I've touched on some, but overall, it was a good session.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I heard there again, use of technology, make data accessible, very similar to with the smallholders. And I loved your phrase, healthy people create healthy nations. If there isn't a self-interest for everybody on that, I don't know what is. Charaf, representing SDG 4 and education, which is everyone's been talking about today. Your 5 minutes are on the clock, sir.
Thank you very much. Yes, indeed, we talked about mainly the role of ICTs in the promotion of education. That was the topic of the presentations, although during the debates and Q&A sessions we expanded to other topics. But overall, the speakers touched on the three main concepts of the definition that we have of SDG 4, inclusion, one of them, quality education is the second concept, and then lifelong learning development, the third concept. So we came up with 5 recommendations that I will present quickly. One is we recognize and acknowledge that there are many good practices in terms of promotion or good practices in terms of the role of ICTs in the promotion of quality education, but we need to scale up and reach out to a larger number of beneficiaries through the examples that we discussed in our panel. And one way we said we could do that is how to better tell the stories, how to learn from what works, what doesn't work, how to improve in terms of evaluation of our program and scale up the good practices that we've been hearing from so many, including from HP this afternoon, in terms of good practices. So that's one. The second recommendation talks about the sustainability of these programs. So we do have as well very good examples from Hawaii and others in terms of accessibility of education, promotion of the inclusive education for children with disability, but we have to work on the exit strategy, how to make these initiatives sustainable, how to leave the knowledge and assets with the beneficiaries. A third recommendation touched on that one concept of quality education, and there was a consensus among the participants that we still have, and we are still dealing with the challenge and issue of teachers' training and quality of teaching. That quality of education is about quality of teachers, and that is still a challenge in sub-Saharan Africa. But also someone in the audience added the point that we also have to look at the leadership and the quality of school management and how we can build the capacity of school management and leadership in schools. Fourth recommendation, and that has to do with the concept of inclusion. So we talk a lot about inclusion of the most vulnerable, the people with disability, rural population, and so on. But we also feel that we still need to understand better the needs of those populations. So first, what do we need? What do we mean by inclusion? But two, how are we developing good assessments of the needs of this population? So that entails two things. One is knowledge of the communities, but also work with the families. And here UNESCO had done some recent research in the region where we found out that not always families are playing a very positive role in terms of education, and in that sense we have to reach out to the communities, to the families, and especially have a very good sense of the needs in the communities. The fifth and final recommendation, or although not a recommendation but an acknowledgement by the end of the discussions, we didn't have time to cover all of the topics, but one topic that we didn't cover is the interlinkages between the SDGs, education and health, education and employment. One example that someone in the audience gave is that although there is women have better access to education, that doesn't translate into better jobs. So yes, we have to improve access to education for girls, but we have to see if that has impact on health and employment and so on. So there is still a lot of work to be done in terms of intersectorality or interlinkages between SDGs. Thank you.
Perfect, perfectly done. Thank you so very much. SDG 4 in 4 minutes, everybody. Thank you, I like that. Again, talk about the linkages, the talk about quality, and the talking about scaling. I think everybody's talked about need to scale. Thank you very much indeed. And now, Bashir, SDG 5.
Thank you.
With 5 minutes.
Very quickly, I just wanted to acknowledge to the president of my former boss. I feel privileged here to share the place with Professor Sheila Tlou, former Minister of Health of Botswana, my former boss, and also representing my current boss, Dr. Catherine Sozi, who couldn't be here with us today. So I feel really privileged. Our panel dealt with gender equality, and I think this is a very, very important topic. And I think we all recognize in the group that gender equality is not a zero-sum game. It's not about who is winning or who is losing. I think we all are benefiting from achieving gender equality in our societies and our communities. And the issue that we also discussed was not only in terms of the business sector, how women today who are in the powerful positions in the private sector can use their positions to also promote gender equality. Not being just in high power, big power positions, but also use those positions to also have resources. So positions have to also come with resources. This has been really, that came up very, very, very strongly. Second point with regard to the youth, we also had an interesting point of view from that perspective. The use of social media, for instance, we made reference to what happened in the Arab Spring, how social media, Twitter, really were used to expand and galvanize young people to advocate for social justice, for instance. And we also talked about use of technology as well, how this can be used and owned by a lot of people, young people, for instance, to also promote gender equality. And since I work for UNAIDS, I also have to also present a little bit from the HIV point of view. As you know, women and girls are disproportionately really impacted by the HIV epidemic today, and we are really looking at how we can address those dynamics. Because as you know, if you look at the statistics, for instance, close to 40% of children today are given to marriage every single day. So we're talking about every single day we're basically marrying 37,000 children being married every single day. So which is really unacceptable and creates also some difficulties in terms of how can we address the needs and the rights of these young people, young women in particular. We also talked about how we can empower young women. We gave an example of Malawi, where cash transfer, $10 per girl per month, not per day, $10 per girl per month, was able to really not only reduce school dropout by 40%, but also reduce pregnancies by 37%. So imagine what $10 per girl per month can do in the context of Malawi with HIV. We also used the example of Niger. A World Bank study also showed that actually investing in young women would have a benefit of $25 billion over 15 years, $25 billion. So we can see because that will also create better educational outcomes, but also low fertility rate for that young girl. So in summary, what do we need? We need to keep women, young girls at school as long as possible. We need to ensure that we can also address the issue of poverty if we want to really, really close the gap between the economic and financial disparities that exist between couples. So I think those things are really important. And last point is, how do we engage? And I think I'm really glad to have heard that the role of the cultural leaders, traditional leaders, this is key. This is key. We need to change those dynamics, those gender stereotypes within the communities. And who are the best person to talk to? Community leaders, traditional leaders. But of course, we also have a challenge. How do we reconcile traditional, cultural norms and international human rights standards and norms? This has always been, I think, one particular area of tension. So I think, and I have 25 seconds, I think this is really where we need to invest more. Let's get smarter. Let's not be afraid of achieving gender equality. It's good for everybody, it's good for the society, it's good for the communities, and only by doing so we can also achieve the better for the world and ensure that women today are in a better position to negotiate within the families, within the marriage, and also participate to all the social goods. So thank you.
Thank you, Bashir. So I heard there, engage with the youth, engage with the local communities. I heard education again, and I heard the use of IT. So we have a very, very well-trained panel. Thank you. And Adrian, just you to complete the set. 5 minutes on SDG 6, and I'll move out of the way this time.
Okay, thank you, Malcolm. And I would also like to begin by with an acknowledgement, this time for Klaus from the previous session, because you ensured that we weren't the only ones today talking about shit. That's not meant to be a flippant remark, because SDG 6 is, I mean, that's what it's about, access to safe water and clean water and sanitation. And we started off by just emphasizing the sheer numbers of people who don't have that access, 783 million without access to clean water, 2.5 billion who don't have adequate sanitation, and but also what that means in terms of impact and some of the things we've just been hearing around gender, the impact that has on girls in vulnerable situations and the health impacts of that, etc. Our panelists came from two from large corporates, Ravi Pillay and Casper Durant from Nestle and Coca-Cola, but also Pakamani Buthelezi, who's the chief exec of the Breda Hauritz Catchment Management Agency here in South Africa. We talked a lot about the kinds of partnerships that have happened in pursuit of of SDG 6 related outcomes by the corporates, which tend to be technical and efficiency driven, and by the CMA that Pakamani leads, which tend to by nature be more multi-stakeholder in nature, in pursuit of policy objectives that filter down from central level. We also established that the real challenges, though, lie not necessarily in the operations around water use. The real challenges lie not necessarily in the operations of efficient companies, already efficient companies, but more in the broader catchment or in the company's supply chains, which may be, of course, not necessarily in the same country. Also, within those supply chains, how essential services, sanitation services, water services are being delivered. And the further out you are away from the company, obviously, the more challenging that becomes. We quickly, though, realized that the conversation needs to move beyond the big multinationals and involve a much broader range of organizations, including small companies. And the conversation needs to move beyond efficiencies and really get into a sustainability mindset. Sustainability of the water resources itself, which are critical to the delivery of services, of essential services that are what ultimately SDG 6 is all about. SDG 6 emphasizes that sustainable management and availability. And that sustainable management piece is really key. We did discuss some of the ways and examples in which that has been achieved. One particular one from here in South Africa, again from Pakamani's turf down in the Western Cape, where suppliers of Woolworths and Marks and Spencers have worked with us and WWF on basically understanding the water quality and water scarcity threats there in that particular catchment around Ceres, and established that the main water quality threats lie in the lack of sanitation for farm labourers. So that has been established by having a safe place for genuine multi-stakeholder dialogues. That's really key in this area. The other thing that we touched upon, so I guess three takeaways. One is the broader participation, including smaller organizations, moving beyond efficiencies towards sustainability, and lastly around consumer awareness. And consumer awareness that isn't based on showcasing success, but is based on understanding and finding genuine pathways to work collaboratively together that addresses the power imbalances that, frankly, have got us into this shit in the first place, says he, finishing the way he started. Thank you very much.
Adrian, and there are some really common themes there, particularly about engaging at the local community level or the consumer level, about the use of technology, and of course, that partnership's kept on coming up and up and up. Thank you, all of you, for keeping to time, for being succinct. Thank you very much, everybody.